We're speaking about money and inflation. In Luke 16, Jesus calls money the least of things, but the way that we handle it much. Money is created by man, and its value is determined by man. Because of inflation, money loses value every day. If we have 3% inflation per year, in 10 years, we lose 30% of our value. There are investments like real estate and business building that hedge and protect against inflation. We're speaking about money and inflation. What does the word of the Lord tell us?
In Luke 16:10, Jesus states, "He that is faithful in that which is least is faithful also in much, and he that is unjust in the least is unjust in much."
It seems odd that Jesus would say that money is the least of things, but the defining word here is that how we handle it is much, and that's what will make the difference for us. We see that money is created by man and also is valued by man. Every day throughout the earth, various monies like the yen in Japan and the dollar are valued and reevaluated, and they change value.
What happened to the dollar in this diagram?
Okay, we're seeing how money changed value over time. In other words, it became worth less. And this is how inflation impacts the dollar. We see that a 1960 dollar today in 2006 is worth about 10 cents. People don't normally think about inflation, but our inflation level has normally been around 3% per year. Sometimes it's been a whole lot more. Back, for instance, in the Jimmy Carter era, when he was president, inflation went into double digits, well beyond 10%. But if you figure an average 3% per year over 10 years, for example, 10 times 3 is 30. That means we lose 30% of the value. Over 20 years, if it's an average of 3%, we lose 60% of the value. So this factor of inflation has to be incorporated in any kind of investment plan that we're doing.
What is the gold standard?
Now, prior to the Second World War, we had a gold standard, which meant that money was redeemable by gold. So that if you had a $10 treasury note and you wanted to go to the bank and you wanted to redeem it for gold, they would give you gold coins. But they eliminated that after the Second World War. So we no longer have a gold standard.
What is inflation?
Now, inflation occurred in the United States for the most part after the Second World War, when the gold standard was removed. Now, inflation isn't anything new. It's been in almost every culture, and it has been a factor in destroying many cultures and civilizations. We see the impact of it in the United States, but essentially what it is it's an increase in the amount of money in circulation. And the government can do that in various ways. They can either print money or do treasury notes. But essentially, as more money is put into the system, it means that every dollar that we have is worth less.
Tell us about the Consumer Price Index.
The government every year tabulates and publishes a price index which evaluates the amount of inflation that occurred over that period of time. Many of the labor contracts and we have leases on our buildings that we own that are tied to the consumer price index. So, for example, if a person was paying $100 a month rent and the consumer price index went up 3%, then the rent would go up 3% or $3 up to $103. So wise business people that own property that they rent out, use this as a tool, because if they don't increase their rents according to this, then the money that they're getting is worth less. They can buy less with it.
Can you explain hedging inflation?
Hedging inflation is a method of avoidance of the loss of the money through selected investments. We've listed some of the investments that hedge inflation. The primary investment in America for most investors is real estate. As the dollar is worth less, normally real estate goes up in value. So it maintains its value according to whatever the dollar will buy. So if the dollar loses 3% in value, then usually that real estate will go up a corresponding 3%. That's the hedging factor. This is the thing that most people don't think about in investments. Stockbrokers don't tell you about it. And people that are selling different types of mutual funds and investments don't talk about it. But it's a factor that's there. And so you have to compute that inflation into your overall investment portfolio to understand what your buying power is, because we see many senior citizens, people that have retired on a pension 20 years ago, and they've experienced inflation, and now they're having to go back to work because their pension is not adequate, and they don't understand why. Well, they don't have the wisdom of understanding what impact inflation had upon their pension.
Liquidity. What is liquidity?
Liquidity is the ability to convert holdings into assets into cash. Now, usually the assets that have the highest liquidity don't hedge inflation. So stocks and bonds and mutual funds and these financial instruments don't hedge inflation. Now, we know with Social Security that they are giving us an increase. I don't believe it really hedges inflation, but it's a nominal increase because the cost of living is going up. They usually give a little bump in Social Security, but with stocks and bonds, all you get is the growth. So you're not hedging the inflation, but with real estate, you don't have the same kind of liquidity. It takes longer usually. Sometimes it can take 6 months or a year or even years to sell a piece of property. So that's the downside of real estate. Same thing is true of business assets that hedge inflation. It may take a while to sell. It's not like a stock or a bond that you can call your broker and next week you can sell it and get the cash. So in order to hedge inflation, we're going to give up something on liquidity. We need to understand that. But we need to focus on investments that hedge inflation. The bottom line is that God wants us to have an abundant life. Investments that hedge inflation are wise and will lead us toward prosperity and sustained wealth.